All right, we will go ahead and get started now. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's presentation, the 5 must-haves of a disaster recovery solution. 2 quick announcements, just housekeeping announcements before we get started. One is that you are going to receive a copy of this replay video as we are recording, and you'll also receive a copy of the slides to the email address that you provided when you registered. You also have access to a handouts section in the software today, so you can go ahead and grab a copy of those slides in the handout section if you want to do so before you get that email. You'll also see in the handouts that there is a report available to you there. And the report that's available is going to be referenced later in the presentation, so you have access to that here as well. I also want to let you know that there's a question tool in the software. Please do use this question tool to ask lots of relevant on-topic questions throughout the presentation. We are going to be doing a prize giveaway this week for the person who asked the most on-topic and relevant questions. So definitely, please be sure to do that. Be sure to get involved and to be eligible for that. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. So we have 2 presenters today. One is from Infrascale and one is from SANS Technology. Craig Halstead is a 19+ year veteran of the technology industry with unique experience at both the partner and manufacturer level. The last 4+ years he's spent specifically in the area of business continuity and DRaaS. Craig is responsible for Infrascale's partner relationships in the eastern U.S. And then Gaurang Mehta founded SANS Technology in 2013 with the intent of delivering innovative, cutting-edge data storage and data protection solutions, helping enterprises simplify and manage their data storage supply chain. With over 30 years of experience in the data storage and backup industry, Gaurang has delivered superior quality products and solutions with a singular focus, helping his customers manage their data better. So with that, I'm going to switch over to the agenda slide, and I'm going to hand it over to Craig. So take it away, Craig.
Thanks, Carla. I appreciate everyone taking some time out of their afternoon here to join us. I think that it goes without saying that I wanted to start the presentation by giving a big thanks to Carla specifically. Obviously, there's a lot of work that goes into this, and I think that some of you that are enjoying the pizza, we owe a debt of gratitude to Carla. So Carla, thanks for your help on this. Really appreciate it. And I want to thank Gaurang as well. I think for everyone in the audience, as an agenda, as you see on your screen, we'll talk very briefly about 4 main topics, and the first would be the problems with traditional DR, the 5 must-haves of a DR solution, and then we'll talk a little bit about Infrascale's cloud failover appliance and what makes it unique, and then we'll have a Q&A and prize giveaway, and in there we'll have a segment where Gaurang can talk about our great partnership and their unique business value partnering with Infrascale. So I think that it goes without saying that the idea of today's presentation is we're not here to pitch you. I think that the idea is to educate you a little bit on disaster recovery as a service, sort of the proliferation of that, how we see it, and how Infrascale sort of addresses that, specifically the modern disaster recovery or DRaaS solution. So on the next slide, we're gonna talk about and dive into this a little deeper. So I know that Carla had mentioned at the beginning of this that we had a couple of polls. Carla, did you want to go ahead and start with the first poll?
Yep, so on your screen now you should see the first poll come up. We just want to hear a little bit from you to be able to tailor this presentation to you and give relevant examples. So if everyone could please participate in that first poll, we would really appreciate it. Simply asking a little bit about you and your company. Looks like 52% of you have voted so far. We've got now 68% have voted. So far, we have a pretty widespread audience. Up to now, we have 41% selected 0 to 100, 18% have selected 100 to 500, 14% in the 500 to 1,000 size range, 9% in the 1,000 to 1,500, and 18% in the 1,500 plus. And we've got about 71% who voted so far, so that is great. Thank you everyone for that participation. I'll close that poll down and then go back into the presentation. Thanks, Craig.
Sure thing. So yeah, I mean, I guess most of you didn't realize we were going to make you work for your lunch, huh? Appreciate your participation on that, obviously. So, jumping right in, I think historically what we have found is that most companies are ill-equipped to quickly respond to outages. So, at Infrascale, we're in the solving problem business, if you will, and let's talk a little bit more about that. So if we look on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the stats behind, or some of the metrics, if you will, that we've seen lately. So when you look over the last 24 months, on the left-hand side of your screen, 91% of those surveyed have had a data center outage in the past 24 months. It's pretty significant. And then 47% of companies haven't experienced an outage or downtime this year. So when you narrow the focus and you look at the term being the last 12 months, it's still a pretty significant number. And I think that what's a pretty telling graph or aggregate of information, at least from our side, is when you look to the right-hand side of your screen, the top causes of downtime. It's pretty interesting. Our CEO and CTO, Ken Shaw Jr., some of you may have heard him speak in the past. He talks about this, sort of in biblical terms, and it's pretty interesting when you look at, the causes of downtime. So, looking at that graph, 5%, would fall into that biblical, so fire, flood, something pretty catastrophic. But what's more telling, I think, is that, and I think that, most of you on the phone can agree, is that local failures or hardware failures are probably going to happen, with greater frequency. So I think that this graph really sort of speaks to that. What was a little bit interesting to me was, the 22% of human error. So, the idea of a junior sysadmin or someone knocking out a cable or something like that, it's a pretty common occurrence. So those of you that are out there that have gone through that, I'm sorry to hear that, but know that you're not alone. And then 18% due to software failure. So this is a pretty good sort of benchmark or framework for us to sort of go forward when we start talking about our DRAS and sort of how we see it. So moving to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail. So exactly what is downtime? So, according to the Aberdeen Group, the cost of downtime for a small company is, $8,000 an hour to almost $600,000 for larger enterprises. And I think that, we can all agree that, the idea of downtime is something that can cost some of us our jobs. But at the same time, too, it's something that I think technology has come a long way towards addressing, and clearly, our goal today is to talk a little bit more about that and sort of what makes, the Infrascale solution different. So when we move to the next slide, historically what we've seen, and I think that when we start talking about, and just for the sake of this conversation, when we talk about a local failure or a catastrophic failure, we tend to speak in a micro disaster versus a macro disaster. So a micro disaster would be sort of what I talked about earlier, right? Something that is probably more prevalent or more prone to happen than something that would wipe out your entire site. But when we look at some of the numbers behind the impediments to companies deploying an on-demand failover solution, it skews pretty heavy towards the expense, right? When you look at this information, again, this is this is a poll that we ran with Actual Tech Media in terms of disaster recovery as a service attitudes and adoption. So 36% of our respondents had said that it was too expensive. 25% had talked about having insufficient IT resources, and 23% clearly just didn't want to or couldn't tackle it due to complex or compatibility issues. So our goal obviously is to address a lot of those and essentially talk about why we're different. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about a little bit and sort of try to quantify the traditional DR trade-offs. So moving forward, and as you look at the different axes here, the offsite tape backup, you're going to have the benefit of a lower cost or a lower capital or operational expense, what have you. But your recovery time is going to be in days, measured in days, and as we've seen, sort of the genesis of this industry, that's not a trade-off folks are willing to make. And then when we look at traditional cloud backup, you start to move up a little bit in cost, and you gain some ground on the recovery time, but the idea there is it's still not optimal. So there's still a trade-off. You're still sacrificing recovery time, and whereas the cost benefit is obviously a conversation that you're going to weigh. And then when we get into traditional appliance backup, again, now you're talking about an increase in cost. However, your benefit there is you may be gaining some ground in the ability to recover. And then moving up the grid, when we talk about like a cold site DR, or warm site DR, or hot site DR, and as you see them on your screen there, I think we can all agree that the virtue of some of those, and then also the curse, if you will, being that they're very expensive. And then it's not even in just straight hardware costs, but you're talking human capital costs, operational costs. So they all sort of work together to get you to a place where it's usually been or historically been out of reach for most companies. So then when we get to the disaster recovery as a service nirvana, so ideally your recovery time is measured in seconds rather than days, and it's relatively cost effective. So it has a better job, or does a better job of fitting in today's modern budgets. And I think with the rise of virtualization, I think the industry has spoken that the idea of doing more with less is obviously the desired state, hence the proliferation of VMware and its prevalence in the enterprise, and now with Hyper-V as well making up some ground. But again, the focus here is in traditional environments. A lot of the conversations that some of you have probably had in your buildings is making that trade-off, and our goal here is to sort of eradicate or mitigate those trade-offs with our solution. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to talk about how we look at things and why DR should be on demand. So in this scenario, you have an end user that's accessing a network, or accessing let's say an Exchange server or SQL server, and they're working away and things are great. And then as we talked about earlier, in the event that you have a micro disaster, whether it's that junior sysadmin had kicked out the cable, or you have a motherboard that fried on your ESX host, regardless, the user can't work, and then thus contributing to downtime. And then when we go forward in the infographic here, so when you look at this slide, the idea here is that with the Infrascale solution, that finger with the push button DR. So in our world, the way we see it, you should have the ability, to essentially continue working in a infrastructure of your choosing. And in this illustration here, whether it's that on-premise appliance that's designated by the gray rectangles there, or whether it's in the Infrascale cloud. So I think that we give you the ability, and our goal in this presentation is to talk a little bit more about how we do that and sort of what makes us different. But the idea there is that with the push of a button, you have the ability to recover your servers, and you have the ability to recover those servers, whether you choose to recover them locally on the appliance, or you choose to recover them in our cloud. And the nice part about that is from the Infrascale perspective, we're very much cloud agnostic, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. So on the next slide, let's sort of dive into that. Let's talk about the 5 must-haves of a modern DRaaS solution. So earlier we talked a little bit about price, and obviously, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about price. I think that when we do that, for us, it's more about value. So in a traditional scenario, when you're talking about a failover site, so in this slide or this illustration, let's say for the sake of this conversation, you've got the production site. Let's say it represents a $20,000 capital expense. So in order to architect a solution where you have a failover site or a hot or warm site, you've got another $20,000 for that box, and then maybe you're talking about the networking in between the 2 sites. You're talking about the human capital time. You're talking about additional software. So it could essentially morph into almost 3 times the cost of what your original investment was. And in a lot of scenarios, and a lot of folks that I've talked to, it's just a non-starter for them. The idea of up to 3x. Again, we're talking about the trade-off conversation again. It's expensive to implement. You're talking about a lot of human capital time outside of the setting it up. You're talking about human capital time and resource intensive to test that environment. And then again, we're going back to that conversation of RPO, RTO trade-off. To get to a point where you're actually doing something in real time, you're talking about a significant more investment than what's illustrated on the screen. And then the last thing is security. Traditionally that warm or hot site is going to be a little less secure than your production site, right? So when we look at the second must-have is to exploit cloud spillover. So how many of you, within our building, I think that we talk about this quite a bit, and one of the things that makes Infrascale fairly unique is we try to get you off the hardware hamster wheel. And I'd be interested to hear from some of you out there that can commiserate with this analogy. So you buy a piece of hardware, it's got a bunch of disk, you fill it up, and when you reach capacity, you buy another piece of hardware, you fill it up, you buy another piece of hardware, and so on. So from the Infrascale standpoint, our solution is essentially used to leverage the cloud, and that cloud could be pretty much anywhere. So I mentioned earlier being cloud agnostic, but in our world, it's more about the elasticity of the appliance. It's about being more strategic with your data and less tactical, and essentially deciding how much data needs to stay in the local appliance and what data needs to stay in the local appliance for how long, and then leveraging the cloud. So when you start talking about economies of scale, the ability for you to have that local appliance, and essentially, we're very much a cloud company. So the difference between us and some other hardware vendors out there, I use the analogy a lot when we talk about, here's the good news. A traditional vendor will walk in the door and say, hey, Mr. Customer, I've got great news for you. I've got this great on-premise appliance solution that's backed up by the cloud. I've got bad news for you. I've got this great on-premise backup solution that's backed up by the cloud, but that cloud can only be mine. So the devil's in the details there, obviously. We are very much a cloud company, so we are not a hardware company per se. We do assemble appliances, obviously, but the idea there is that we're trying to extend the life cycle of that appliance and get you off that conversation that manufacturer that I just used in that little session there. In about 6 months, they're probably going to be knocking on the door to sell you a new appliance because you've reached a capacity. With Infrascale, it's a matter of intelligently spilling that data over and giving you policy-driven retention on both the local appliance and its target, as well as the data pool. So you're actually aggregating 2 separate data pools, but giving you the ability to be super strategic about where that data sits. And in our world, the local appliance's mission in life, outside of doing great backups, whether it's physical or virtual, is to be a restore target. And it being prime real estate, we give you the ability to sort of designate what data needs to stay where and for how long, and we can certainly talk more about that. So moving on to the next slide, or the third thing to look for in a DRaaS solution, get complete coverage. So at Infrascale, I mean, I think traditionally what I've seen from folks, and I think this is more of a byproduct of where the industry has been, because, let's be honest, I think that, never have we been in an environment where has the industry been at a place where, we've been creating more data, and never have we been at a place where that data has been more important. So when we start looking at that, what I've seen historically is the challenge for most companies is they create this Frankenstein type of monster in trying to manage their environment. So with Infrascale, the idea is get complete coverage, whether it be physical servers, virtual servers, whether it be some of the more esoteric operating systems that are out there, Unix, Linux, Novell NetWare. Across our entire stack, we've got support for over 100 versions of operating systems. I talked earlier about whether our deployment flexibility, so you can deploy it as a physical or virtual instance, and the fact that we're cloud agnostic, so that you can actually deploy or point that target regardless of if it's our cloud. Infrascale does maintain their own cloud, but if you have some, if your requirements are to point it to whether it be Amazon or Azure or any third-party cloud, we can architect a solution to accommodate you. But the important thing is the fact that we can offer you a solution from a single pane of glass to protect any device, whether, like I said earlier, physical servers, virtual servers, desktops, laptops, mobile devices. The idea there is that we give you the ability to cover down on those, and then the fact that you can boot anywhere, whether it's in our cloud, it's in your cloud, or it's in any cloud. So whether it's on the physical appliance locally, whether it's on a virtual appliance locally, or whether it's in a cloud, whether that cloud be a third-party cloud or ours, and then what I mentioned earlier, the fact that you can fail back any systems, whether they're VMs, applications, so you can really protect your whole environment rather than making trade-offs in what to protect. So when we go to the fourth, key DRaaS, or the fourth of the fifth, key things to look for in a DRaaS solution. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but true push-button failover. So again, going back to what I said earlier, the ability for you to replicate or spin up your environment, and giving you the flexibility, but giving you the ability to spin up that environment in an infrastructure of your choosing. So the key point here is that it's a push button, and ideally it's web-based, but you have the ability with Infrascale to spin up on the local appliance or spin up in the cloud, whichever cloud that may be, and our appliances actually you can spin up as many as 20 VMs on our appliances, and we can certainly talk a little bit more about our hardware solution and what it looks like. But the idea there is that from a single pane of glass, you have push button failover, and what we like to talk about again within the building is we provide true push button failover for what traditionally folks have been paying for backup. So it's a pretty unique technology, and we've talked a little bit about that, and obviously would welcome the chance to show this to some of you folks sort of live and in person. And then when we get to the last, or the fifth key thing to look for in a DRaaS solution, encrypt your data. So in this scenario, we talk a little bit about our encryption methodology, but the idea there is that, and we can certainly as a one-off, or if we were to take it offline with any of you folks, we can dig a little bit deeper. But the idea there is that we have a pretty sound encryption methodology, and this slide talks a little bit about that. Certainly happy to go into a little more detail with anybody that wants to take a closer look at that. But the idea again is that we provide a solution that gives you functionality, and really, to me, the important thing is what makes us fundamentally different is that we've actually untethered the appliance from the cloud, and we give you the ability to decide where the data stays and for how long, all the while bundling in some pretty cool features in addition to encryption, which I think is, obviously a must-have, right? But I think that, some of the things that we do within our appliance that make us different is pretty obviously unique to Infrascale, and we sort of mitigate the need for you to create that Frankenstein-type monster that I mentioned earlier, essentially through a single pane of glass. So on the next slide, I think it's the time for another poll, so I'll let Carla.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So you guys have heard quite a bit from us, and we'd love to hear again from you. So just launched the next poll. You should see it up on your screen now, simply asking, failover DR, which of these is you? A, I can failover to a second site in under 60 minutes already. B, I wish I had failover DR, but can't afford it. C, I don't think I need failover DR. We've got 47% who voted so far, so we'll give everyone another moment to reach forward and vote on this poll. About nearly 60% who voted so far. So if everyone could please participate, we'd very much appreciate it. And thus far we have 47% saying, A, I can fail over to a second site in under 60 minutes already. Curious to hear, can you fail over to a second site in under 15 minutes? Let us know. B, we have 40% of you who've said, I wish I had failover DR but can't afford it. So we'll speak to that in just a few minutes here in the remaining slides of the presentation. 15% are saying, I don't think I need failover DR. So we're curious to hear from you. Why is it that you don't think you need failover DR? And we have the majority of you who voted, so I'll go ahead and close that poll down so that we can get back into the presentation. Thanks, Craig.
Sure thing. So I wanted to just take a quick minute. I don't know, Carla, if this is a good time to address some of these questions, or did we want to hold that until the end?
We could, if you'd like to answer some now, we could definitely go ahead and do that. Not
Sure.
a problem.
Yeah, so Scott Bryan writes in, Scott, thanks for the question. Can I use my own cloud provider? Absolutely. When we talk about Infrascale and our appliance, the appliance, and hopefully this answers another question that's out there, that appliance can be delivered as an OVA template under VMware or Hyper-V. So the replication model is essentially a one-to-one, and where that's, so, the nice thing is it's not a scenario where we're just FTPing data out to a secondary site or a repository. It's actually a one-to-one replication with an active-passive pairing. And in that scenario, the secondary can be promoted to primary at any time. So the way that the appliances function is more or less, where that secondary appliance is or where that secondary target is more or less a function of who you want to write a check to rather than technology. So the appliances don't know where it's replicating to. So the answer to that question is yes. We certainly can talk a little bit more about it, but I want to address that question. We certainly can use your own cloud. The flexibility that we provide, whether it's a virtual instance, a physical instance, whether it's in your cloud, whether it's going disk to disk, disk to cloud, or disk to cloud, we certainly can talk a little bit more about that, and I'd be anxious to do so. There was another question out there. Let's see. So Michael writes in, we see clients being very price sensitive and less interested in whistles and bells. How do we successfully position against competitors like iDrive or Carbonite? Great question. So iDrive and Carbonite, great companies, and I think that the idea here, I mean, at least from my view of the world, is I've been doing this too long to throw mud at anyone. I think that across our stack, the fact that we give you the ability to scale up. So whether it's someone that's looking, I mean, Carbonite and iDrive are more of an online sort of file folder. Our DRAS solution is an appliance-based solution. We do give you the ability to cover down on some of those, agent push type of, if you want to talk about how it functions. But I think that, we protect more operating systems. I think we scale. We do a host level backup of VMware. So I think that there's, certainly welcome the additional conversation with you, Michael, about some of the specifics on how we're different. I think that the fact that we give you a single pane of glass to aggregate a lot of this information, whereas if you were to deploy an iDrive or Carbonite, you're going to reach a feature cap, and it's going to prevent you from going into some of the larger environments, if you will. And then again, at least from what I've seen in my experience, then you run the risk of falling into that sort of vendor fatigue scenario where you're managing 4 or 5 panes of glass and you've got 4 or 5 of your people that are becoming subject matter experts on one particular product, and there really is no synergy across that stack. I think that what makes us different is that our pricing model is pretty easy to understand, and then in licensing, I should say too, and the idea there is that we give you visibility to more and essentially make you more efficient in managing that. So if I didn't adequately answer your question, I certainly welcome an opportunity to do so personally. So moving right along, I think that, so this is the part of the discussion where I'm going to talk a little bit more about Infrascale and and tell you a little bit about what who we are, what makes us different, and sort of what our mission. So our mission is to eradicate downtime. Our goal is to be the #1 disaster recovery as a service vendor, and is to equip every company with the ability to quickly and affordably recover from any disaster, large or small. So when we move into the next slide, so the cloud failover appliance, what is it? So recovers servers and applications in seconds. I mentioned earlier you can recover 20 plus VMs simultaneously, and you can leverage existing Infrascale backup hardware. It scales from a 1U to a 9U, so as you see in this slide, and we can certainly talk a little bit about what makes us different. Again, really at its core, it is a cloud sort of repository in the sense that it leverages the cloud, and it gives you an independent data pool and retention policy for the cloud target, wherever that cloud may be, and that on the local appliance. So really different than some traditional hardware vendors out there where once you reach your capacity, or some other vendors may give you, for the sake of this conversation, let's say you get an 8 terabyte appliance locally, well, your retention policy is limited to that 8 terabyte rectangle that they shipped you. And the minute that you get over that 8 terabytes, they're knocking on your door to sell you another one. Happy times for them, right? For us, it's about making sure that we're being super efficient. And again, going back to what I said earlier about being super strategic and less tactical with that data, considering that what we talked about earlier, how the proliferation of that. And then some other cool stuff, we've baked in DDFS, or what other folks would call WAN acceleration. So again, mitigating the need for another piece of hardware. Essentially, we maintain dedupe tables on both sides of the wire, and although all the backup jobs are synthetic, what we're sending across is the desynthesized version, if there's such a word. I may have just made up a word. And it lands at the target as a full backup. So some pretty cool technology, and I mentioned earlier that it does a great job in physical and virtual environments, and does a global block level dedupe of a VMware data set, and is pretty neat when you actually get a chance to see it live and in person. So a pretty unique, in the way that we look at it, definitely unique business value when you compare other vendors out there, and keep in mind too that the appliances are also very modular, so you actually have the ability to, again, speaking to our value. I mean, there's 2 things from a hardware standpoint. You get the ability to, when you're upgrading our appliances, they're very modular. So in the sense that in the event that you're going from a 2U to a 4U, it's not a forklift upgrade. It's, in that circumstance, we're essentially going to be shipping you a new drive cage and a new chassis, and then you're popping the drives out from the old one and add them to the new array and the new one. In addition, when we talk about the appliances themselves, you have the ability to, they come with a 3-year hardware and software maintenance, and essentially getting you off that hamster wheel of, so whether it's you need to expand that capacity locally, or you're deciding to spill it over to the cloud, you've got a ton of flexibility. In addition, in our appliances, when you get into the 2U model and above, there's a designated drive for archiving. So you have the ability, if some of you are stuck or have customers that are stuck in that land where they just culturally can't detach themselves from a scenario where they're physically picking up a hard drive and moving it off-site, you can eject those drives and move them off-site. So we can talk a little bit more about that. When we start talking about DRAS competitive comparison or disaster recovery as a service competitive comparison, I think that the idea here is that we give you the ability through a single pane of glass to manage a lot of this stuff. Look, the bottom line here is all great companies here. I just think that we're different. I think that we look at the market different, and I think that we've got a very compelling offering. And I appreciate you guys giving us some time to talk a little bit more about that, and certainly willing to sort of laser focus on that or get a little bit more granular with each one of you, should you desire to talk more about that. But again, the idea is that we offer a pretty broad stack, and we do it very affordably. So moving on to the next slide. Again, I talked about this a little bit earlier. Glass, you have the ability on the left-hand side of your screen, if you were to deploy appliances, you'd get visibility into your appliances. The appliances themselves will get a local console. It's a best practice, but this is a web-based dashboard, so you can access it from anywhere. Essentially log on and you can get visibility and manageability of your fleet, and you're going to get some pretty good reporting, some monitoring, alerting, and then in addition, you're going to get some great account usage. So you can really drill down and take control of your deployed devices and your deployed infrastructure. Moving to the next slide. I think this is, I've talked a little bit about this, what makes us unique. I mentioned the pricing, and we can certainly have that conversation. The cloud spillover, again, is a very unique thing to Infrascale, and I would welcome any of you on the phone to take us up on it, and we could talk a little bit more about that. I want to make sure I leave enough time here for Garang. We talked about the Pushbutton failover, and again, the complete coverage. We cover over 100 versions of operating systems today. They scale from mobile devices all the way up to desktops, laptops, physical servers, virtual servers, and we're a development-driven company. So where our product stack sits today, I'm super excited about where it's going. I think we've got a lot of super smart people in our building, and I think that the needle's just pointing up for us. So I think that brings me to the end, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so I stand corrected again. So Gartner cool vendor for 2015, and I'll just address that real quick. I mean, the reason is essentially what I've talked about a little bit in a couple slides. The fact that we've untethered the appliance from the cloud, the fact that we've given you the ability to be strategic, less tactical with your data and decide where it goes, and hardware hamster wheel. Again, we're a cloud company. The idea for us is not to, if your data set's growing, that's a great conversation to have. I think the better conversation is how our partnership with Infrascale can help you address that growth in the most affordable fashion. And I'm fairly certain that the next slide takes me to the end. Okay, so without further ado, I know my friend Garang, and I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to our great partner, SANS Technology, and CEO Garang Mehta. Garang, when you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate the time, and hope you all are enjoying the pizza. A little bit about SANS Technology as we go to the next slide. Yeah, it's not switching. There. So as a company, we're a data storage company. We manufacture a variety of data storage appliances. Infrascale is a key partner of ours in the backup and disaster recovery space. And we really hold the true singular belief that data storage really resides in the software layer. And Infrascale clearly has developed cutting edge, very innovative software for backup and disaster recovery, and thus our partnership with them. So we build storage solutions for clients that meet a variety of different needs, whether it's hyperconvergence or secure file sharing via private cloud, or backup and disaster recovery. So we go to the next slide. A little bit, just I think Craig mentioned this earlier. He talked about this earlier. He introduced us. We really focus on the whole data storage supply chain. I think in the next slide you'll see what that is. But why don't we go to the next slide and we can talk about that. So we really see a data storage supply chain as being kind of cradle to grave for your data, from the time you create it to the time you have to access it, protect it, replicate it, archive it, back it up somewhere. There are a whole variety of stages your data goes through, and we have solutions that are integrated that provide all of these capabilities. So the backup piece that falls into the cloud backup recovery service, and our hybrid cloud backup, our unified storage appliances with Syneto, and our enterprise private cloud, sort of our Dropbox and Box.net for the enterprise with FileDrawer. So that's a little bit about who we are, what we do, and I just want to thank you all for joining us today, and really open it up for questions at this point.
Yeah, sounds good. I think we have lots of questions coming through. Thank you to both of you guys. Great presentation. We have tons of questions coming through, and while we sort through all of these and start the Q&A, I am going to launch just one last poll for everyone, and then I will come back to this screen so you can make sure to have both Gaurang and Craig's contact information. Again, a copy of these slides are in the handouts, so you can grab that as well, and you do have access to contact them with anything that did not come up today. But I am going to just launch one last poll while we go ahead and start the Q&A. See a comment from Michael already. He says, "Love that hamster wheel quip. I'm going to steal it." No problem, Michael. We have plenty of others too, so just let us know what you need. Let's see. Okay, so there is a question from Michael that I don't believe we answered earlier, but Craig, correct me if I'm wrong. Michael's asking, for Cloud DR, what are the general licensing guidelines for application software? If warm or hot restoration, do we have to double our licensing cost? If we have an on-premise appliance as well, do our costs triple?
Well, I mean, I think that a great question. It's a very densely layered question. I think that so for one, if I understand it correctly, I mean, maybe I can just paint a picture and give you a sample environment. So, I mentioned earlier the fact that we have the ability to be super flexible when we start architecting our solutions. So whether that's, I think, the first question you ask is, what is your cloud strategy? So if the answer to that question is, whether it's by corporate governance, whether it's just because they are still leery of the cloud. I mean, for whatever reason, if folks can't or won't replicate to a third-party cloud, that's fine. In that scenario, then we're replicating appliance to appliance. In Infrascale, or as far as we're concerned, the only number that really is paramount, or the number that is paramount, I should say, is the size of the data set you're looking to protect. So I can't speak to licensing models when it comes to Microsoft and Sage. I will say that from our side, it really is just a matter of understanding where you want to replicate that data and how big is that data set. I'm sorry that I can't answer the question. I mean, in terms of a warm or hot restoration, I wouldn't say you're necessarily doubling your licensing costs. I mean, the great thing is like I mentioned earlier, whether it's a traditional cloud setup, whether you're replicating to the Infrascale cloud, the nice thing is that it's not a one-to-one. So what I mean when I say that is you can very well have a 8 terabyte local appliance and 42 terabytes of cloud space or failover space in our cloud. And the reason for that is it could be an aggregate of the cost. Maybe we put our heads together and decide that the economy of scale or the pricing model is probably better to leverage more of the cloud, or maybe it's an operational thing, but the idea there is that it doesn't have to be a one-to-one. So in your scenario, the restoration could be a 4 terabyte to an 8 terabyte, or a 4 to a 20, whether it's physical to virtual, and really you're only paying us, or our pricing model is really just predicated on the size of the data set that you're looking to protect. It's not as granular as licensing, and it's a pretty easy model to understand. Certainly happy to have additional dialogue with you about that. I'm not sure if it answers your question, but I do appreciate the question. It's a great question. I think that we could probably sit and talk about that for another 20 minutes. Unfortunately, I don't think anyone else wants to hear us talk about it. So Michael, if you want further clarification, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and it looks like Michael says thank you. And then there is a question from Scott, more specific to pricing. So Scott, we will definitely reach out to you after the presentation just to see more about your environment and what your needs are, so that we can give you some accurate pricing to what you need. I see lots of other comments coming through here just saying thanks for the pizza. So you're very welcome. We're glad to have you here. And don't forget about that prize giveaway. Be sure to get your questions in. The person with the most relevant and on-topic questions is going to be winning a free Xbox One. We do have 2 webinars this week, and then we'll be announcing that winner on Friday. Make sure to check your email to see if you're the winner for that. So I see another question here. Can you give a quick overview of Infrascale's company history and customers?
Absolutely, great question. So I mentioned earlier that Infrascale was born in the cloud, and I meant when I said that. So we're very much a cloud company. We grew up from SOS Online Backup, which is still an Infrascale property. We are headquartered in Los Angeles, California, about a rock's throw from LAX in El Segundo. We have a secondary location in Salt Lake City, Utah. So all of our support is US based, and I actually physically reside on the East Coast. So covering the East Coast in the Eastern time zone. They try and keep it simple for this sales guy, because too many numbers, probably they wouldn't rely on me to do the math on the time change. But we've got 12 data centers, 16 global points of presence, and I think that today we're protecting over a million objects in our cloud. The number's probably grown. And when we talk about, we're a venture-backed company, and we were founded in 2006. We've got a great roster of clients, and happy to have additional dialogue on who we are and what makes us different. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yep, sounds good. Follow-up to that, since you mentioned support came through, is your support 24/7?
Yes, 24/7, 365 days a year, and like I mentioned earlier, all US-based support.
Yep, and just to add a little bit to that, we do have support available through email, live chat, ticketing. We have a knowledge base as well, and our phone line has a 1-hour SLA, so regardless of time, day or night, if you call in. All right. Next question is another follow-up to your mention of the 16 global points of presence. The question is, do you have a data center in Canada?
Yes, we have data centers across the globe. We actually, it's a common practice for us to deal with data sovereignty. So if data sovereignty is a concern of yours, we certainly be happy to have that conversation.
Yep, and then in addition to the Canadian data center in Toronto, we have data centers in the UK, Australia, South Africa, South America, and like Craig mentioned, we are very focused on security. The data centers are all Tier 3 and Tier 4, biometric credential requirements, redundant cooling systems, et cetera, et cetera. Another question regarding compliance. Are you HIPAA compliant?
Yeah, we certainly can. Again, we can talk about your HIPAA compliance needs. I think that we've got compliance for a lot of the governing bodies, Sarbanes-Oxley, SAS 70, SOC 2, and certainly HIPAA is a requirement. So the HIPAA is obviously it's a unique animal in and of itself. So I'd be happy to offline learn a little bit more about your HIPAA requirements. I'm confident that once we have a discussion, we can architect a solution that covers down on those needs.
Great. And then Michael is asking, we are an MSP and systems integration firm considering a partnership with Infrascale. What marketing materials are available for channel partners, and do they support co-branding? And actually, Michael, I'll go ahead and answer that question. I'm the online marketing manager at Infrascale, so I do work directly with our channel partners on these co-branding and co-marketing types of events. So I'm happy to work with you on those. I'll send a specific email to you giving you further details and information. But yes, we do provide MDF, and we do virtual and local events with our partners, and we do help with demand generation and lead generation. So I'll send some more information to you about those specific co-marketing opportunities. Okay, and it looks like we are coming just to the end of the hour. We do want to make sure that we stick to our promise and just keep it at an hour for you. We know you have a busy schedule, a busy day ahead. So let's see just the last couple of questions here. This next question is another sort of competitive comparison. It says, how do you compare to Datto?
Great question. So I think that on the surface, number one, look, Datto's a great company. I think that they do, a really good job. I know that they partner with StorageCraft for the operating system that runs sort of under the covers on their appliance. I think that the important thing to remember for us is our cloud agnosticism. So, Datto sort of falls into that, their cloud's the only game in town when it comes to that deployment flexibility. I think that, when you start getting into the bigger enterprises, specifically with VMware, I think that they reach a feature cap in terms of their ability to, back up at the host level. So, with our global block level dedupe of VMware and now with Hyper-V, we're going to make that storage super efficient. We're going to manage that storage a lot better, and you're going to pay less for it. So I think that there's some inherent differences, and I would say probably the glaring one, and it's probably true of anyone, is what I talked about earlier, is the cloud spillover. I mean, there really isn't any other vendor that is sort of going forward with an on-premise piece of hardware that approaches the market the way that we do. And again, I can't say it enough times. I mean, essentially, we get you off that hamster wheel, and the conversation is more about prolonging the life cycle of that appliance rather than, we didn't really talk about this, but I'm sure some of you on the phone can commiserate or agree that a lot of times, or either whether it's yourself personally or someone, when you're buying a piece of hardware, it's a pretty, it's sort of an intimidating experience. And when I say that, you run the risk of buying an appliance that's either too large for your capacity or you end up undersizing it. And in that circumstance, it's a very big deal for, when you under or oversize an appliance, whether it's you outlaid all this money and, it was a significant investment, or, now you're faced with doing a forklift upgrade, having to bring in another appliance, porting the information over, and there's a lot of hidden costs there, when you start talking about human capital, et cetera. So I would say that our ability to spill that data over to a secondary target and giving you the ability to do that, not to mention that our push-button failover that we talked about does not require any human intervention. As I understand it today, in order to do a cloud spin up Datto, you're getting on the horn with their tech support folks. With us, it's something that you're able to do through your dashboard. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that, sort of offline. Hopefully that gives you or paints it with a broad enough brush. But I would say that, the main thing is the cloud spillover and the fact that we've untethered the appliance from the cloud and you're not locked into that capacity that, is on that local piece of hardware.
Great answer, Craig. All right, another question says, is there a demo or an evaluation available? And we do want to be sure to mention that to everyone. For joining us today, we would love to offer everyone a free CFA evaluation unit to test out for 30 days yourself. If you are interested in that free CFA evaluation, just type in your name and your email address or maybe your phone number, however you would best like us to contact you. Just type that into the question tool so that we make sure that we reach out to you to set you up with that. And I'm going to also close this poll down now and be sure to put Craig and Gaurang's contact information back up on the screen. Again, thank you everyone for participating in that poll. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been a great presentation. Thanks to Craig and Gaurang for being here and answering all those questions. And I see the eval requests coming through now. First one came through from Tony and lots of others coming through. So we'll be sure to get in touch with you and follow up with you for that. Looks like that last poll, we had the very majority of you voted. We have a widespread audience on that too. Some are saying not happy with my current backup systems. Others are happy with their system but interested in the cloud failover appliance. Some deploying new equipment and looking at other vendors. And then of course some that are happy with their current systems and here learning. So we definitely want to provide as much information as we can for you. All right, so with that, it looks like we're just up at the end of the hour. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, keep an eye out in your email on Friday to see if you're the winner of that prize for this week. Thank you to Gaurang and Craig, and we hope that everyone has a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
All right, we look forward to working with you in the future. Bye.